Hey guys, this is Sauce123. Today we're going to be, I guess I have a little bit of a special video planned for you guys. This is going to be a live play 300-600 no limit session. Yeah, it should be fun. It doesn't stress me out that much to play this big because I don't have a huge piece myself. I have a reasonable piece. So don't think that I'm just, throwing my roll down the table. But I have a big enough piece where it's a good game for me to be playing. And it's fun to play really big once in a while. And I thought you guys might get a kick out of it. So, I guess before we start, I'm just going to... I folded Queen Deuce offsuit in the big blind here. But anyway, this is going to be my second hand at the table when the small blind comes around. And, it keeps me interested, I guess, to be talking about my hands while I'm playing. Here comes my HUD. I actually should make my layout a little better. So this is a hand, well, I'll get into that in a second. I'm going to talk about this hand when I have the time. So this game is going to play differently than some other games. I could call here. It's like really close, and I guess it depends how much I want to gamble, but I'm not going to. Basically, this game, a lot of the strategy is going to be based around getting into pots with Malaysia. He is a strong player, but, a much weaker player than the rest of these guys who are all just extremely good no-limit players. So, because they're sort of, not dead money per se, but, he's playing, way, way weaker than anybody else at the table. And so with him at the table, I'm going to do more flat calling because he has position on me, and I'm going to try to either get him to 3-bet or to play the pot, and less 3-betting than I normally would against these very tough players, because a lot of the 3-bets that I'm going to be making are definitely marginal relative to flat calling, and when flat calling is such an attractive option, I'm going to make my 3-betting range narrow and quite polarized, and especially given how much Malaysia 3-bets, I'll be fairly likely to 3-bet almost never because he has direct position on me. So that's an adjustment that you guys should make anytime you are in a game like this. So that's the main thing. As far as these guys are concerned, most of these guys are stars regulars too at the high stakes, and I know who they all are. I'm not going to, I could tell you who they are, or I might not, but it doesn't really matter that much because this video is not going to be probably the most educational video I've ever made, because obviously I'm actually playing 300-600 no limit right now while I'm chatting with you guys. So I'm not going to explain my reads and all these players and exactly what I'm doing. I'm more just going to fill up the sort of dead air between when I'm playing hands and just chat about situations and spots and what I could have done, what I should have done to keep, hopefully both of us entertained. And when I'm playing hands, I'm going to, focus on hands for the most part. Because there'll be plenty of times in this video when, I'm just not involved in a hand. Yeah. So obviously 10s we're opening. There's not much to say about that. Ace 4 we're folding. And yeah, it should be fun. Hopefully we'll get in a few interesting spots. And, more than that, hopefully it'll be interesting for you guys to see, see me playing huge stakes. Most of my videos, I guess my biggest video up to this point was 10-20 no limit. And for me it's not that much different, but it might be fun to see me gamble for a lot of money. So hopefully I can get in some interesting spots. Yeah, and I guess a lot of the analysis in this video is going to be on playing against weaker players, because I'm going to be talking a lot about how Malaysia plays and what I'm doing to combat that, and how I'm adjusting my ranges to play more pots with him. So that's pretty much the idea. Here we have 3 checks. My hand is probably best. I think kings get c-bet from call 911 fairly often. So I like my hand. At the same time, I'm not sure that I can value bet it particularly. This bet, I think he probably checks almost every king on the turn. And I basically just have to decide, how many kings he has relative to not kings. And, it's close. This isn't a huge bluff spot for him. I think he fires most of his semi-bluffs in the turn, so he's really representing like king, queen, or king, jack here. I'm going to go ahead and call. So he was bluffing. So that was nice. That was kind of an interesting pot, I guess. I would have expected him to fire the turn with that hand some percent of the time. And I think that's generally just a spot where this player doesn't usually have very much. But given that he bets, he's probably fairly balanced. But I think he's just not betting that often. So it was kind of a tricky spot for me to figure out. I ended up just sort of like clicking call and not feeling great about it. Basically my hand's a fairly strong bluff catcher in that situation, but nothing amazing. I brought some snacks, no popcorn today. So here comes Malaysia. This is actually good. I like making a video when I'm one-tabling because it forces me to actually watch the hands that I'm not in instead of like watch silly videos on the internet. So this is good. So we have a continuation bet from Malaysia. On fold. Not surprising. And a min raise from the button. Just look at his stats in the button. I believe he is... so this is a situation where, this is obviously a fold, but it's even more of a fold now. Malaysia is very aggressive in position. And generally just like quite aggressive pre-flop. You can see this is I think the stat's a little bit buggy. But he has, maybe it's not actually. Maybe these guys, I guess this looks about right around the table. But anyway, he's like a pretty aggressive 4-better and a relatively aggressive 3-better too. So I'm not going to be getting, particularly out of line. Especially, look at his VPIP compared to the rest of the table. My stats are insignificant, but the rest of these guys, we've got 32, 29, 29, 28, and he's at 41. So he's, significantly looser than anyone else at the table. I think most of that comes with opens. So we're going to take a look at those. You can't see this. It's going to be just off your screen. But, yeah. So he's 52% still from the cutoff and 77% in the button. And, that's significant. That's where a lot of his VPIP is coming from. Those very loose opens. And let me see his raise first in from early position. I should know this really, but yeah, so he's 30 from early position, 29 from middle position, and then he increases up to 52 and 77. So he's a player who very much values raising first in and is positionally aware. I think that Malaysia is a very smart poker player. Like he's clearly a thinking player, and likes to compete. And it's not surprising that he is a big winner in Macau. But he just doesn't have the fundamentals to beat this game. He's going to be losing, a ton of money in this game, in my opinion. Although I could be wrong. If he plays perfectly at post-flop, then he can probably make up for his pre-flop mistakes. But that's going to be hard to do against this lineup. As you can see, I made a terrible fold pre-flop with the queen 10. I should have probably called to let them both into the pot, and I would have had to check call the flop, check call the turn, and then, guess bet something on the river. That would have been the line. Once I get focused, I'll try to start putting people on hands. Thus far, I haven't been. I'm so used to not focusing on the hands that I'm not in that it's a hard habit to break, because I so rarely one table. Maybe coffee will help. Canoe took her down. This is a hand that I'll just raise. I could think about limping, but I'm just going to raise. This is probably a fold here. The button in this hand is a pretty loose opener. So it's a hand that I can think about getting involved with against an extremely loose button range. But again, with Malaysia in the pot, and he's just playing so many hands and 3-betting so aggressively, and 4-betting very aggressively, it's probably not going to be plus EV, even with half a big blind invested. Fairly large turn bet, but nothing crazy. We can expect him to have a very wide range for that turn bet. This is a very easy fold on the button. I think some people make the mistake of opening just crazy wide on the button when there's a really weak player in the blinds. But that's a mistake because every weak player is different. Malaysia is, yes, a weak player, but he's, a not extremely loose player from the small blind, and he's, quite aggressive. So against a player like that, marginal opens are actually going to decrease in value relative to most regulars. And I can expect to exploit him by having a relatively tight range to open, calling lots of 3-bets, and generally outplaying him 3-bet pots. I think that's more or less what I'm going to be doing. And obviously, like anytime I have aces or kings or queens, I'm just making unbelievably large amounts of money because he's 3-betting tons and 4-betting and 5-betting really light. So ace-king, also a good hand. So this is a spot, it's kind of close in my opinion, between 3-betting and just calling. I'm actually just going to call because I'm valuing keeping the button, keeping Malaysia in the pot a lot, and also he's just like pretty squeeze happy and does lots of different stuff. So yeah, I'm going to widen my calling range. I think this is a pretty obvious call on the flop. Raising's also fine, but I'd rather have the ace of diamonds so that if I play a huge pot and diamond runouts, I don't have to river marginal value bets and things like that. On this turn, I don't expect him to bet very often. My range should look very jack heavy and, relatively 10 heavy. And I don't think he folds very many better hands if I bet here. He'll probably fold a hand like 8-7 of hearts. And he's also a very aggressive pre-flop opener, so I do fold him off some equity, but my hand is just sitting in a weird spot in my range to try to bluff. And on this river, obviously the only weaker hand that I really have when I take this line is ace-queen. But that's actually a decently large part of my range. Ace-queen should look like a fairly large part of my range on this spot. And yeah, I'm not going to make a play here. I'm just sort of chatting about the spot. I'll just fold. I think his range for checking turn is wide and quite uncapped. I think he's likely, because the jack's just a card that I'm going to be forced to bet a lot. And so I think he can represent a lot of hands in that river. And obviously on that river, tons of my range, either river's pretty strong. So I think I'm definitely not going to be making money with a bluff raise there. And if I was bluff raising, I would definitely want, some kind of pair in order to block some of his boats. I would want obviously a jack is going to be pretty attractive, but he's just going to have so many hands there that are like pocket nine is going to be a fairly big part of his range. He's also pretty likely to check raise that 10-8 suited, things like that. He's just going to have a lot of different hands. I think bluff raising is fine there if I had a better blocker, but it's not an amazing play. I also think people are sometimes a little bit more straightforward in this game, just because it's so big. And I think some people probably have pretty large pieces of themselves, and they're probably not looking to try and outplay me in very marginal spots. Obviously, my range is not extremely uncapped, but fairly uncapped in that river, and decently strong. I have plenty of calling hands. Quads, that's a good hand to get. Just gonna look at the action here. Call, check, check, bet call, bet call. Fairly loose call from Mal. Call 911 should probably think that that Malaysia's range is not very ace heavy. So I think his betting is good. Obviously it worked out because he got called by a very light combo. And that might be even Malaysia's range might be very heavy in combos almost. So this is a spot. My hand is so weak that I'm just going to fold. But it's I could call here and just plan on basically just outplaying him. But I'll just fold. I think it's just a little bit too weak. If I was suited, I would call. Fairly standard flop action here. He will be betting a lot on this turn, and he will be calling a lot. I'll also be folding some hands, but not a ton of hands. Folding hands are hands if he has ace of hearts, eight of spades. That's a folding hand. Some small pocket pairs, things like that. I'm going to go ahead and raise to 3 times the big blind and take it down. I don't have strong opinions about preflop raise size. I've been raising 3x from every position, and that's just because that's what my table ninja is set to. It's nothing particularly mysterious. I feel a little bit more strongly about smaller raise sizes and heads up no limit, and that's because we start in position and we already have a small blind invested. So I think 3x is generally a little bit big, but still very fine. It doesn't really matter much, but I think it matters even less in six-handed. Getting a walk. So here we have a marginal hand in the small blind. This is a fold. Even with this overcall, it's a fold. I think squeezing is okay if we have some read on our opponents that we think that they're there's not a great read to have here, honestly. Just a squeeze is just going to be okay in this spot. And the reason why a squeeze is okay is basically because of our blockers. When we hold the king and a 10, we cut down on some of the combos that they continue with. Pocket 10s always continues, pocket kings always continues, and ace king always continues. And we block all those combos, so it's going to be an okay hand. And we can flop well. Being suited obviously makes us flop way, way better once we narrow their range down. So the offsuit combo is just going to be pretty marginal. Very standard hand here. Just had a small c-bet and a check down. I'm going to raise. And we have a call and flopping a set. Not bad. I'm going to bet about half pot. This is a size that I would bet with a lot of different hands in my range. On a board like this is a board where it's a pretty good c-betting board. Not amazing. But it's a board where... So I'm going to fold this in the cutoff here. But it's a board where if I have a hand like, say, ace-9 of spades, yeah, I turn pretty well. But I can definitely get blown off my equity in a lot of turns. I'm going to turn a lot of gutters that I can't really continue with and things like that. So I think there's a lot of hands like that. Or even, a hand like king-queen off. A lot of hands that looks pretty good to c-bet with here. And then also, obviously, when the big blind just flats my raise, I have a pretty darn strong range advantage. I'll raise the 8-7 suited from the hijack. I think that's standard for most players. It's definitely standard for me. I think it's just one of those hands that's, it's a fine raise. It's not making me a ton of money, but it's okay. Obviously, with that flop, it's not bad. So I'm going to bet again. Betting about like 48% pot. Again, it's a size where I can sort of thin out his flop calling range and start applying pressure on turns, or more pressure. Obviously, with my exact hand, I'm way ahead. This is a hand that I think is a very obvious 3-ball. Just making it one big blind less than pot. Trying to widen his calling range slightly and make it... I don't think it matters a ton what sizing to use there, but I think he's opening pretty wide, and I don't want to just like make it a size where I'm just always getting 4-bet. This is a hand where I would 3-bet normally, but I'm just going to call. I want to play pots with Maul. If he 3-bets, I'll generally call here. And I'll check and sort of see what develops here. This is a spot where my range is going to be wide. I don't connect that well with this board. Obviously, I'm going to flop a bunch of sets here. But it's not a spot that I flop a ton of sort of like marginal hands. I think this is a pretty... I think the thing is I have no 3s in my range, really, besides ace-3 suited. And that's a very marginal pre-flop call. So I think this 3 is very blank here. My range contains, some 7s and 4s, but it contains a lot of hands like the hand that I have. I'm going to call again. I think it can easily be, sort of value protection betting, lots of 7s. And he can also, obviously that's an amazing river. And he can also just have like any club combo. He can even have like 10-9. He can have ace-king. He can have king-queen. And I'm going to check shift the river. I think that's extremely standard. I have to decide whether to shove here or raise smaller. Shove is really big and reps exactly what I have. That being said, 6-5 is a hand that I can raise for smaller sizing, but there's not that many other in-betweener hands. His range contains every boat combo, obviously, when he takes this line. So I think that I think shoving would be a little bit strong unless I want him to fold like boats or something. I want to raise the sizing where like trips is going to be in a tough spot as opposed to a situation where a boat's going to be in a tough spot. So I'm just going to go ahead and raise to 38, and I'll call it off. I expect him to call here with most threes, maybe all of his threes. And it's a spot where if he has an overpair, he's just going to be in a terrible spot. I do think because of the card removal effects, like a shove here is fine, but it's a play it's fine. I mean, I think check shoving's fine. Obviously, like, yeah. Let's see what he had here. A7. I think that's, like, not probably good by him. That's a super duper thin bet call. Sorry, it's a little bit hard to explain exactly why I'm making the raise sizes that I'm making in the moment. Part of that's just playing poker and just kind of like figuring out what I think he has when he bets that size with that timing. I can't communicate that exactly. But I knew when he bet that size that I wanted to raise roughly the size that I chose. And then I was like trying to be like, well, you know, you raise with these hands to that size. But it's a spot where I'm risking 38-4 to win. It was he bet 14 roughly. He bet like 13-9. So it was like 32 in the pot. And it's a spot where, especially given that he's v-betting A7 and probably any 8, it's a spot where like well more than half of his range is going to be thin value bets. And so it's a situation where I think a bluff with like 4x or even a weak 7 is going to be pretty attractive, or pocket 6s, pocket 5s. It's a big part of my range too. So I think I bet a size where he's just going to have to call me with some of his thin value bets. And like the one he chose is a fine value bet to call with because he blocks a 7 and he doesn't block any of my bluffing hands. So, I mean, I think once he bet, his call is good. Or at least fine. I mean, it's not like a huge spew call or anything like that. But I think that the river bet in the first place is very thin, especially for that size. So we have a small 3-bet from I Read Your Soul. And this is a spot where I'm going to go ahead and 4-bet and fold to a 5-bet. I'm going to make it a size where he can't really raise me back easily as a bluff. So I'm just going to make it 14-4. This is just very marginal play. I expect this to like work roughly as often as it needs to for it to be break even. But it's just going to be a spot where I need to defend my range sometimes, and I'm going to do that. With that sizing that I chose, he should have a very small calling range. I think it's like even if he has ace king, he's going to be in a tough spot. So I definitely, with that size, I apply a ton of pressure. So it looks like this might be a short video, unfortunately, but we got in one big pot that was kind of entertaining. And hopefully this is, a fun video for you guys to watch. I'll play the rest of the orbit. And because of the way these games play, I have to hit the sit out next big blind key, or else I'll just end up posting an extra blind and looking silly. So I have to do that. But yeah, that's how it goes. And to put a little more time in this video, I will probably pick the 8-8 hand to analyze a bit. And I'll throw that up in Card Runner ZB in a second, after this game breaks. I expect this guy to be given up a good amount. Goat will probably end up winning the pot quite often. Oh, it's somewhat rare. This is not, the Russian players tend to be pretty aggressive on boards like this. which is why I sort of made that like pseudo read. It's not really a read. It's just kind of like paying somewhat of attention to how they play. But it's a spot where I would be confused about what this guy had. Seems like he's confused too. There's probably a lot of Russian on Russian leveling though. I think they probably have a very good idea of how each other play. I think they probably talk a lot of poker. So maybe they mix it up more against each other than they do against, people like me. So we have a bet, 60% pot or something like that. And a little bit more, I guess. And a fold. And that is it. So I'll pause to take a look at this big pot in Card Runners EV. I'm sure you guys know which one I'm talking about, but the big pot. And when I return, we'll take a look at those results and sort of take a look at what's going on the river, especially given that we know that he's value betting down to A7. Take a look at how I should have been playing, how I probably was playing, and see how that works out. I'll be right back. Hey guys, it's Sauce. I'm back again, and I have a Card Runners EV simulation of that final hand, or not final hand, but the big hand where I had 8s. And I'll just take you through that real quick. I sometimes just like to take a look at a big pot or an interesting pot from my sessions in Card Runners EV and just trying to sort of figure out if I played it relatively correctly and, see if the things that I said about my opponents were correct in the moment. And if you remember, you probably remember than I do. I've been working on this sim for a while. But I thought that for Haley's value bet with A7 was probably too thin by a lot. But I think that his call was kind of okay. And I think that this sim pretty much bears that out. So what I did is I'm just going to take you guys through it starting from pre-flop. I'm going to move pretty quick here. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. But we have a very wide pre-flop range here from button. And this is like 75% of hands, 77% actually. And I think he's really going after Malaysia. For better or for worse. I would be much tighter in that situation, but I don't think it's that bad to min raise a lot and try to play a lot of pots. It's definitely high variance. And then I have a range for myself where I have give myself a 3-betting range of 17%, and my range is pretty much stuff that's either the nuts, the relative nuts, like hands that I can call or raise a 4-bet with, some hands with some good blockers, and some hands and also hands that tend not to be super playable. I might actually 3-bet a bit less than that, or maybe even a little bit more. But it doesn't really matter for this board because none of these hands really connect with the flop in question. But the basic idea is that I do think I want to 3-bet in this spot a decent amount, just because I think that the button is opening so wide. So even though I do want to play pots with Malaysia, there's some hands that I think I just want to 3-bet now in order to sort of just win the pot straight up and not have to play a multi-way pot with kind of a disconnected hand. Then I have a calling range, which is a lot of hands that connect well with this board. So you can see it's these EV numbers are crazy because it already knows what the flop is. But it's just like, small and medium pairs, a variety of suited cards that I want to play a multi-way pot with. Even like ace-jack suited or something. I definitely could raise that, but I might just call it instead in order to play a pot with Maul. That's pretty much what's going on. And I input some calling ranges for Malaysia, but we don't need to worry about that too much. And I'll move over to the flop now. So we have a check from me and from the big blind. And we have a c-betting range for the button. And this is just a sort of generic 70% of hands. It's a bunch of hands that are sort of protection betting and leveraging his sort of position and the fact that we're playing fairly deep and the fact that his range is generally somewhat stronger than mine. Although I actually connect quite hard with this board given what I think my small blind range is, just because I'm going to have a lot of sets. And so I think this is probably a little bit too aggressive of a betting range, but it's certainly fine and not crazy at all. And then I just input my sort of calling range. And I have a lot of hands on this board that sort of either have something pretty decent or just have nothing at all. So, like, I'm not going to be floating here with ace-9 with a backdoor flush draw. That's just going to be too loose, especially with Malaysia behind me, who can just raise me out of the pot. And also, because I want to play pots with Malaysia, I'm going to tend to not check raise this flop. Since there's no hands that are, like, snap check raises on this board that just have to get check raised, I'm probably going to wait till the turn quite often. So I had myself continuing with 44% of my range, which I think is, completely fine and a pretty tight strategy, but a fine strategy. And, of course, Malaysia folded, so he's out of the hand now. He's the big blind. And then the 3 of clubs turn. I check, and then I had a very aggressive betting strategy for the button. So he's betting any top pair for value. Like I said, that 3 is like a pretty much complete blank, unless I have exactly ace-3 suited, which I might not even play pre-flop. So I do think this is a very good betting card. Or not very good, but a reasonable betting card for button. Especially since he can, sort of apply pressure later on the river if the river comes in a Broadway card in a lot of different spots, and he can get some of the marginal hands out of my range, and all of his hands have equity. So like even if you look at like his very weak hands here, like just overcards, they have 28.6% equity. So I mean, even his weakest semi bluffs have a lot of equity. So I think it's a very not very good, but a strong barreling turn. So he's barreling here with 83% of his range, which is obviously high, but I think it's reasonable. And I have myself calling with 75% of my range. I think this is a spot where he's barreling a lot because he can, and I'm calling a lot because I can. There's just some hands that, because he's not betting that big, are just going to have so much equity, like one pair and a gutter, that has 55% equity now against his range, which makes it probably a marginal call, or maybe marginal fold, I guess. But because of the gutter equity, and just the fact that we can river the nuts, I think it makes it a pretty clear call. And then obviously I'm going to have a flush draw sometimes, and those are going to be calls. And then top pair better is going to be a call just because he's betting any top pair himself. So, and just because of the blocker values. Once I have top pair, it's very difficult for him to himself have a top pair combo because I block a good amount of those combos. So there's my calling range. And the river's an 8, as we well know. And this is sort of where I did most of the work. So he bets here. I gave him one value bet thinner than the value bet he actually had. Obviously, he value bet a7. And I said he would value bet a7 and king 7 and anything better, which I think is like pretty reasonable. I don't think he has very many thinner value bets. Maybe he's betting all the way down to 9-7, which is possible. But I decided he wasn't because I think that would be... I think, as you guys are about to see, I think his value bet with a7 is already way too loose, given what we think my range is here. But... he made it, so I have to put him on a range. And then to balance, he's going to have some of these overcard combos of various kinds. So I just gave him, a subsection of any overcards that are king high or worse, because ace high will sometimes win at showdown, so he doesn't want to bluff with that. So he's just going to have some of these overcard combos that he bluffs with, and that'll just balance his betting range so that my calls are less profitable. And here I have my defense strategy. And we're going to look at 2 different raise sizes here. One is all in, which was one of our options. And the other one was the one I made, which was about half pot. And then obviously I have a calling range too and a folding range. So the easiest threshold to set is the calling range, because I need to, call it. Certainly he has a ton of bluffs on this river. See how he's only continuing with 40% of his bluffs. So I definitely have to call enough to make him indifferent with those bluffs, or else he will just bluff too much and I will lose money. So I have to have a pretty healthy calling frequency here. I actually just call a little bit less. This says that I'm only folding 36%. I actually want to be folding, more like 42 to 45% on this board to make him indifferent with his bluffs. But that's neither here nor there. This is close enough for our purposes. And that's, roughly I want to be calling with at least middle pair top kicker. So like ace-7. And I think that already makes it very obvious that his value betting range is way off here, given the fact that he's value betting hands that don't beat anything in my calling range. So I think that's a big tell that he's doing something wrong. And the thing is, my range just isn't going to be that wide because I'm flatting I'm flatting in the small blind, which is a very difficult place to play in poker, in 6-max poker, especially because the big blind's an aggressive 3-better. And the board, and then I called with the big blind left to act on the flop. So my range is just going to be tight here. And he has to think that I have hands like 7-6 offsuit in my range and like 4-5 suited, hands like that, to make his value bet good. And I'm just not going to have those hands. They're just too loose to call pre-flop. So he's making a big mistake, I think, with his value betting region here. Okay, so and then let's look at the check raising regions. I looked at the 2 bet sizes here. One is all in and one is my half pot sizing. And I said that for the all in bet size, I would only do it with a full house for value. And for the smaller bet size, I'd do it with a straight or better for value. I think the big thing that should jump out at us here is that given I'm always slow playing my boats on the turn, maybe I'm not, but I think that because I always have showdown value with my range, slow playing boats on the turn is like a very reasonable play. If I'm always doing that, then that means that I'm going to have a boat almost 26% of the time here on the river, which is like insane. The 8 is a great card for me. It increases my boat's frequency by a lot, by like almost a third. But even so, I mean, because I have all these pairs in my range pre-flop, it's just going to be a really difficult board for him to barrel. So my range is extremely strong. So he should be picking a small bet size in general here, I think. Okay, and what am I raising? Well, given that I think that he's value betting thinly, which he is, I'm raising any boat. Yeah, and I'm raising a straight against the smaller bet size, which I think is okay. And then we can see he needs to be calling here. I have him defending 35% to the all-in bet size. Defending here with trips. I think that's pretty standard. 8-7, 8-4, and 7-4. All of those hands are have really excellent blockers. And then A7, which he needed to call a little bit more often than I had him calling, so I just picked a random 7. Any random 7, 8, or any card like that will just do just as well here pretty much. As long as it doesn't block one of my bluffing hands. And I don't think I'll ever be check raise bluffing with A7 myself, so I think the ace is a pretty fine neutral blocker to add to the 7. But as you can see, like, the call with 8-4 suited and 7-4 suited is winning, and it's losing with 8-7, and A7 is just getting crushed too. So I mean the blockers matter a huge amount here. And my bluffing hand here, I'm having 9-7. That's just a hand that is has a pretty good blocker because it blocks some of his boat combos, and it doesn't block that many of his thin value bets, and it's not really strong enough to call. So that's my bluffing hand. I could maybe bluff with a different hand, but that's the one I chose just for the purposes of this sim. And as you can see, the EV here for check raising with 8s is for all in is around 79 bets. 3s is 67, and these other ones are 74 and 73 against that calling range. Then we can swap this around and look at the. Oops. Just going to run the EV run here. Just take a second. Look at the smaller bet size. And it's 72 here. And a little bit less for the other hands too. Don't worry about the bluffing region here. And that's just, he is calling less often, or sorry, calling more often against the smaller sizing. But not enough, according to this at least. So actually, in fact, I think I did make a decent sized mistake in the hand, given that we now know how thinly he's value betting river. So in hindsight, I think I should have just shoved, and I would have probably made an average of these assumptions are really sensitive to how he's calling, which hands he's calling with and stuff. So maybe I would have made an average of another 2 or 3 big blinds. So I think that was a small mistake on my part. However, betting a hand like A7 is like a massive mistake on his part. So like, for example, you can see here that King 7 has an EV of 3 blinds to bet, and checking King 7 or Queen 7, because we can't look at King 7, but checking Queen 7 has an EV of like 16 big blinds. So I mean, he's just making massive mistakes by betting those hands. So I think that's really where the main take home in the hand lies. And there's some different. He has a reshoving range over this half pot bet size, so I had him just. This has him shoving any full house. That's probably a little bit optimistic. He shouldn't be shoving fours. I think he would probably shove sevens. Maybe he wouldn't be. And he shouldn't be shoving these smaller boats too, so that's probably not quite right. So I think in general, yeah, a shove would have been better with exactly pocket eights for sure. But at the same time, I kind of felt like he was fairly weak on the river. And in that situation, I felt like I wanted to get him to hero call with his weak hand, as opposed to, fold a lot of his thin value bets. So I think my play is okay. It's really hard to know against this specific player which one would have been better, but I think in theory, given that we fix his betting range as being this wide, a shove is definitely the play. But again, that's already assuming that his betting range is way too wide. So it's sort of a catch-22 analysis-wise. So that was my breakdown of the big hand today. This has been Sauce123, Ben Sulsky, 4ornaments.com. I hope you guys enjoyed this sort of hybrid video. Good luck at the tables.